Right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this, actually the last in the series of this season's sessions on Coffee Break. There will be a future series in the autumn where our content providers are taking a well-deserved holiday. My name is John Williams. I'm Chief Executive of the Agile Business Consortium, and I think this is probably about the 5th or 6th of these coffee break sessions that we've done. A couple of housekeeping things. Please don't do anything embarrassing when you leave if you leave your camera on, and please keep yourself on mute unless invited to be otherwise, because of course, otherwise then we end up like a typical video conference with everybody gabbling at the same time, stuff like this. This session, probably the most important one that we've done actually, I think really, this session is going to look at the results of JCURV's State of Agile Culture survey, which has been going for the last couple of weeks, I think really, and will run till the end of this month. And with me to talk us through that survey is, as usual, Vikram Jain, who's co-founder and managing director of JCURV, and also Agile Jain, who's co-founder of JCURV. Welcome to you both, and Vikram, over to you to talk us through the data.
Okay, so first of all, thanks so much for joining today, and for those who have kind of filled in the survey, thanks so much for doing that as well. I know it's an interesting approach to use. So what we're aiming to do today then is a couple of things. One is that we just want to kind of share with you some initial findings from our survey, and then secondly, making it interactive, we just want to get your perspectives on some of the trends that we've identified as well. Okay, so that's what we're looking to do. Now, just for those of you who didn't know about the survey, the objective of the survey was really just to get into a little bit more detail about, why, what's going on from an agile culture perspective in organizations. For those of you who've read the State of Agile report, which comes out every year, they do talk about the fact that culture and behaviors and leadership are key enablers or impediments to kind of genuine successful transformations. So we thought we'd go into more detail and get to the point where our survey allows leaders and organizations to identify what are the key kind of enablers to unblock impediments like that. So that's kind of what we were doing. Now, just give you some facts of what we've got from completing our survey so far, and the survey is still open until the end of the month. But we've got about just about 1,157 responses so far. You can see the coverage across the world. So what's nice is that we've obviously got kind of a heavy focus or bias towards Europe, but we have got a bit of a spread across the Americas and also Australasia as well. And from a sector perspective, it's actually quite a good distribution. So we've got, lots of people from financial services, education, public sector, etc. So I think that's been quite good. And our statisticians in the team basically say that we've actually got statistical significance, which is always good. And also when we look at the survey response we've had, it's a good split across the organizational size. So we've got, a fifth of the people who have responded work for organizations which are bigger than 20,000 people, all the way through to obviously lots of potential, small organizations too. So it's a nice range and representation. And then the last thing is we asked kind of each of the respondees kind of, where are you in terms of your agile maturity, in terms of are you using agile at all in your organization, all the way through to are you applying it across the enterprise? And again, what you can see at this kind of bottom right graph is that there's a nice balance between organizations just experimenting in pockets, all the way through to using agile for major transformation programs, through to applying it across the whole enterprise as well. So we're quite pleased with the spread that we've got. And hopefully that just gives us a bit of confidence that what we found, what the insights we're getting are kind of representative as well. So just quickly on terms of the actual survey approach, which I think it's worthwhile just acknowledging what we've done. So we've gone out there and we've used a set of questions which we've used many times before, which just give us an indication of the health of the culture and the behaviors and engagement levels of teams and organizations. And we know, and I'll go into that in a bit more detail, we know that when those improve in terms of the rankings on those questions, we know that actually that results in increased performance. So we've proven that correlation before. And then to spice things up a little bit, we've used and we're working with an organization called Truth Sayers. It's worthwhile looking them up. and they're using neuroscience to drive the way that we've run the survey. So for those who have filled it in, perhaps you've said this is really uncomfortable, but the whole focus is it's trying to focus on getting the real people's perspectives, like the unconscious view, as opposed to what people think they should say. Okay. And I'll go into a bit more detail what it actually means in a second. So the aim here is that we're trying to use a survey tool which will improve the accuracy of the results. And just as a reminder, these are the questions that we've asked. So we've broken this down in terms of getting perspectives on what myself, what I think is working, or how I feel right now, where my company is, and also where my leadership team is as well. So it's kind of a 360-degree view. And we've asked questions such as, how comfortable is your organization around experimentation? What happens if you fail? Do you get reprimanded? Is there a kind of a blame culture? All the way through to my leader empowers me, etc. So we've really asked a broad range of questions. And as I said, in the last 5 years, we've used many of these questions with lots of organizations that we've worked with. And we've shown that as the scores go up on this, actually performance goes up as well. And this is kind of what, just a bit of science. This is what it looks like when we get the results. So this little radar plot shows two different circles. So the blue circle is effectively what we traditionally use as a survey tool. So we say, well, I rate out of 5 how I feel about I'm enjoying my role. Okay. Now the green circle then is what they've used, their neurotechnology. So they've used that that tool. If you've used the survey, where you're basically having to react very, very quickly to a question, and maybe the question is asking you to almost say something or agree to something you don't disagree with. And that's where the neurotechnology comes in, because the delay in your response basically provides, again, a statistically significant view on whether you genuinely feel that way. Okay, so that's how we've used the tool. So hopefully all that makes sense. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through 3 different cuts of what we've found so far. So this is our initial view. We finished the analysis, you'd be pleased to know, at 1:30 last night. So these are the high-level insights. There's so much more detail to go through over the next couple of weeks, and when we pull up with the kind of more comprehensive reports. But what Pa and I pulled out is just a few highlights, which we thought were really interesting. And again, we'd love to get your perspectives on it as well. So we're going to go through geographic cuts. We're going to go through a sector cut, and we're going to go through like almost a scaling methodology cut as well, to see whether there's some relationships between that and agile culture too. So let's have a look at geography then. So just to give you a quick example. So for each one of these geographic regions, what we've been able to do with the data is to basically state where there's a stronger bias or agreement to those question statements, and where there are things where they're scoring relatively lower on as well. So as an example, what we found, Europe as a whole, of all the people who've responded, they're strongly agreeing with that they've got a stronger view on encouraging, their businesses are encouraging experimentation. They're also saying that actually they're feeling like they're more empowered as well. So that's quite interesting from a European perspective. In the inverse, you could have a look at America. They're saying actually they're really recognized for their contribution. Their ways of working are quite efficient. Inversely, on the opportunity side, they're saying that they don't agree as much with a statement that leaders are encouraging us to experiment, or I'm clear on what I need to do to support my organization. Yeah. So you can see that there's each region's obviously going to be slightly different. And one learning for us, I guess, as a consultancy, is to recognize that when we're working with international teams, and sometimes we're working with teams made up of 3 different regions, is just recognizing that each one's very different, and we need to turn the volume up and down on certain things. So maybe with Americas, we should be focusing more on working with the leadership team to ensure that they're comfortable with that experimentation versus some other characteristic as well. And then one interesting kind of point here, and I've highlighted it in orange, is that there is a theme of where we're continually, consistently scoring lower on in terms of an opportunity is clarity. So we had 2 statements. One is that I am clear on what I need to do, And then the other one was, I am clear what the direction of my organization and my team is as well. And if you remember when we ran the last coffee session, we were talking about, you know, the key fundamentals of empowerment is that clarity, competency and control. And so here we're identifying that many regions, and it's across the whole of our surveyed population, are stating they don't necessarily have, or they don't strongly agree that they have a clear view on what they are expected to do or their organization's doing as well. So, and if we can address that, then obviously that means that we can empower, be a stronger at empowering the frontline teams as well. I don't know if you've got any perspectives on any of those, John, as working internationally as the ABC.
Yes, I think it's really, really interesting because I was thinking about Hofstede's culture matrix and the Professor Hofstede who talks about things like differences in power distance, in individualism and collectivism and uncertainty avoidance and stuff across different cultures. And yet the standout issue here about the need for clarity appears to be relevant in every culture, almost every culture. So I think there's some very interesting commonality here, in addition to the expected differences that I would expect to see across cultures. And certainly from the consortium's perspective, we would absolutely concur with the need for more clarity to be provided from leadership in every culture, in every sector, in every organization. And I think maybe that's a sign of the times, not just the current times we're in, but the run up to these times, where actually people might have been motivated and enthused, but not necessarily awfully clear about the direction or destination. So this is really interesting.
Yeah, and especially with more ambiguity and uncertainty coming through over the next year or so, it's even more important as well.
Yep.
Okay, let's just quickly doing a bit of a deep dive. So this is just an example of the depth that the survey provides. So obviously we asked a bunch of questions, or we got people to state their strength around leadership. I feel empowered by my leader, or my leader encourages us to experiment, etc. Interestingly, if we have a look, one interesting fact that we pulled out is around Americas. So they actually scored relatively lower in terms of confidence around agile leadership versus the average. And we tried to understand why, and it was really they were saying that people who responded anyway in America were just saying that leaders, they're not as confident that the leaders are encouraging them around experimentation, and also they were saying that they don't feel as confident around I feel empowered by the leadership team too. So again, it's kind of starts to highlight that, you know, we've got to really be a lot more conscious of the different biases and the backgrounds of each of the different teams that we're working with when we're working with international organizations. And this is a really interesting one. It's a smaller population sample, but we just have a look at Africa. And what was really interesting is that what it highlighted was that the leaders are absolutely encouraging. So there's a very strong bias in terms of, I agree that leaders are encouraging us to experiment versus the average. So they're very entrepreneurial, and, you know, some of our experiences, we've got some African clients as well, is our experience suggests that's right. There's so much opportunity out there, you know, that people are encouraged to kind of be very entrepreneurial. Interestingly though, that the rating around I agree that I'm clear on what I need to do is very low, much lower than average. So I guess, let's not pick on a region, but we've seen organizations where you are allowing, kind of giving control away and allowing people to go off and be quite entrepreneurial. However, it comes at a price if you're not providing the clarity, because then you've kind of got a bit of chaos as well there. And we've seen that in a couple of regions, in fact. So really interesting kind of insights from a regional perspective, and they're quite different as well, more different than we thought in some respects. Okay, so from a sector perspective, again, what we're able to do here is to say, well, which sectors have got more maturity around their agile culture, which ones are not as mature. And what we kind of just picked out really are which of the sectors which are the least mature. Our average kind of strength around the scores, about 55. And in comparison, you've got the three lowest kind of scoring areas were public sector, industrial manufacturing. Some of that may make sense because, you know, maybe it's more lean than agile. and then media, which is quite interesting as well. So that was quite interesting for us. And over the next page, I'll explain to you what it looks like in terms of which is the strongest sector. But when we just unpicked the public sector, here's some of the things which scored below average. And again, this is a perspectives on ratings against statements. Okay, so I'm clear on what to do. I make a positive difference to our customers. Leadership prioritization, empowerment by our leadership, and then recognized for my contribution, all come slightly lower than the average on this side. And so you could kind of, what's the kind of the golden thread going through all of this stuff? You could say that, you know, there's a lot of stuff which depends on or is enabled by the leadership team or the leadership in terms of providing the clarity, being better at prioritization, focusing on empowerment and recognition as well. And then there's another piece which is, you know, making a positive difference for our customers. So how customer centric perhaps is the public sector compared with other sectors as well. I don't know, John, if you've got any perspectives on that.
Yeah, just very quickly, if I can, particularly the one about making a positive difference to our customers, that's in a sense is about purpose.
Yeah.
And you know, we spend a lot of time, of course, in the private sector talking about purpose, thinking about purpose, using it as a motivator. It's unsurprising, I guess, that it's a little less clear in the public sector, because if the purpose is essentially to make the world a better place, it's really hard to get hold of that, to be tangible about what that means and how I, as an individual, can make that positive difference. I think that's very telling. The other point that you made about empowerment, when we talked about the regions, about empowerment being a double-edged sword. And of course, that might also be something to do with that issue of culture, whether cultures are individualist or collectivist, because there are some collectivist cultures in which empowerment might not be as attractive. And actually, the public sector tends to have quite a collectivist culture. So there's some interesting things to dig deeper in here, I think, certainly.
Yeah, yeah. And then, interestingly, financial services came out as the most mature when it comes down to people kind of stating agreement with those statements. So it's not above average in terms of, you know, it's a much stronger view, 70% versus 55%. And some of the strengths are around kind of agile leadership, interestingly, in terms of people are rating that their leaders are empowering and providing the clarity, etc. But even with that particular sector, there's still some opportunities to improve, and whether it's clarity on what I need to do personally, and also there was a bit a lower score around we have a great team spirit. And to John's point earlier, I think what we've seen comparing, say, non-for-profit versus financial services, is that connecting the teams with a purpose, with a greater purpose, sometimes increases engagement levels, increases the team's kind of the team spirit in a way, and sometimes that can lack within financial services.
Yeah, can I just have one quick point? The other thing about financial services, of course, is that it's a brutally competitive arena, not only for the companies, but also for the individuals within the organizations very often. And I think that that may well work against team spirit to a degree. Yeah.
So this is just obviously we've got so much more information, but we just wanted to provide some interesting highlights for you. We've got a quick question just to dig deeper into the public sector. So we're going to run a quick poll just to get your perspectives on what are the potential interventions that you'd suggest to help address that public sector score. Based on kind of what we've found here, what are the things that we could do? So Pyle, are you going to quickly ping out the survey?
Yeah, so if you look in the chat functionality, you'll see I've just shared a link. So if you click on that and put your thoughts in, that would be fantastic. And if you just make 1 point, hit return as you put your point in, and then what we'll do is we'll do a vote and see which ones we think are the most applicable or the most impactful. And if you click on the yellow bar, then it will just give you the uploaded comments. Okay, and once you've put your thoughts down, if you don't mind reviewing all the comments, and everyone has got 3 votes. So if you can prioritise your 3 votes.
And 3 votes being thumbs up.
Yeah. As to what you feel are going to be the most impactful for the public sector. Very dynamic live voting this morning.
Improve leadership. Yeah.
Okay, it looks as though voting settles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's some really good points here in terms of just making sure that I guess there's more openness and transparency on leadership, and focusing on the customer. I think is super important on that side as well. And then some people are talking about just education on what Agile is. We haven't worked in the public sector before, but it'd be really interesting to understand. We've seen that there's been quite a significant investment in this way of working, hasn't there, in the public sector, and what I've seen. So is there more to be done in that respect? John, I'm not sure what you've seen in the ABC.
Yeah, and what I've seen there, and certainly the conversations that I've had with people relate to this idea of promoting a shift to service to the people rather than service of the state, because that's a decision about who the customer actually is. And I think that people who work, the feeling that I get from people I talk to about people in the public sector is that they work in the public sector because they have an internal purpose to serve people and to serve the in a sense the country, rather than to serve the government or what is perceived to be the state. So there's a dichotomy there, I think, in the minds of people who work in the public sector. Maybe that relates to some of that clarity that that they feel is lacking as well.
Mm-hmm. But it sounds to me, based on what the folks saying on this, is that there needs to be more. Potentially, there's an opportunity to invest more time and to support the most senior leaders in the public sector in this space.
I think there's a requirement to support them, to support the people who work in the public sector, I think, really. And because when I look at the things that are there at the top of the list, the challenge is all about how do leaders behave in order to encourage the right responses from the people, not just about empowerment, but actually, in a sense, sharing things like purpose and being very clear about who the customer is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, brilliant. So yeah, some really interesting stuff. Maybe some of this is maybe obvious before, but actually it's quite interesting to see it kind of quantified in some respects. And then the last one, just wanted to highlight something around agile approaches. So again, this is kind of something which came through, which we had a hypothesis about, but we didn't quite appreciate the strength of this one. So we asked people, survey responses, kind of what way of working are you using, and it was really quite interesting. So this is the kind of the strength of the score around agile culture. So let's just say if you're using Scrum in your organization, they were saying it's actually relatively strong in terms of applying those agile ways of working there. But what was quite interesting is you kind of move to the right, where you're now scaling agility, and you're moving to the point where even that you're getting into the DevOps or value stream management, where you're now depending on integrating, different silos together. To John's point around, aligning around the customer experience, your user experience, your data, your journey or whatever else. It seems that the maturity from an agile culture perspective goes down quite significantly. And interestingly, if we then break that down and say from a leadership perspective, so how do the respondees say where their leadership is on that? And it's even more kind of stark in a way that, again, Scrum's quite strong. And obviously the majority of the people who responded are using Scrum only. But again, for those people who are now starting to apply more sophisticated tools and techniques and ways of working, you can see that the culture and the behaviors on the leadership becomes more stretched, and potentially in this case, it looks like it's quite diluted. And, you know, from our experience, John, you know, when we've started to apply DevOps, or especially value stream management in businesses, it's really putting a lot of tension on leaders then, because maybe it's easy when you've got it in one function or one particular project or program, but when you're having to manage, you know, or support multiple functions all work together in order to deliver a great outcome from the customer, that's where it becomes really, really challenging.
Yeah, at the leadership level, definitely, because then there's a sort of requirement for leaders to be agile in their mental behavior, for them to accept actually that in a division that's agile is fine because they can mentally silo that away from the rest of the organization. Actually, as we extend that to the enterprise level and the sophistication or maturity of the agility, if you like, that is a huge demand on leaders. And that comes back to what you were saying before about the public sector leadership. It applies, I think, pretty much to everybody in leadership, that there's a great unfreezing of leadership mindsets that needs to go on in order to help them be guided, I think, really to agility as a leadership mindset.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, so there's a general trend, and again, you have a look at the State of Agile report, which is produced on a yearly basis. They see that the growth of DevOps and value stream management is going up, the big trend, and obviously the returns that you get from applying those methodologies are very significant. However, you can see that it's really stressing out as I said, going back to our views on if the scores go up on these particular statements, you get greater performance. If they don't, then obviously that's a challenge. And one other trend that we're seeing is that obviously as organizations are flipping to more value stream organized ways, we are seeing it being done in a very binary way. So, you know, it's being thrown in using a restructure. So we bung everyone into value streams and jobs done, you know, but, you know, you can see if you're not getting the culture elements right, and you can see it's quite apparent here, that's really going to have an impact in terms of the business case of what you thought was supposed to be achieved as a result of putting in those more sophisticated and complicated structures in place. That's
the cliche, isn't it? Sort of culture eats everything for breakfast, really.
Yeah. So, we thought that was particularly interesting, you know, in terms of, as I said, where the industry is going, or where organisations are going. It's going to get more sophisticated, and it is going to get a hell of a lot more integrated in order to eke out the next level of efficiencies and productivity gains, etc. But it just says to us that it's even more important when you get into that kind of area that you've got to turn the volume up massively. As coaches, as consultants, etc., is supporting the leadership team through that journey, I think is super important. And we've got we kind of wanted to run another quick survey around that. So, Pyle, do you want to just take us through the question?
Yeah, so I've just sent out another link on the chat functionality. And this time the question is, what do you think organizations using value stream management or DevOps, why do we think they're not as mature versus those organizations that are using Scrum and obviously scaling Scrum across the organization? So as before, if you just put your input in, someone's already gone with the first comment of it's because it's hard. But yeah, agreed. Let's try and dig a little bit deeper as to what are the components to break that down. So if we just give you a couple of minutes to input your thoughts, and hold back on the voting or the thumbs up just yet. Okay, I can see that some people are putting the thumbs up. So if you can take three votes of what you feel are the biggest areas of opportunity. Okay, wow, we've got some clear winners this time.
What's at the top?
Can you see that? So Scrum focuses on delivery, whereas DevOps requires a systems thinking approach that is much harder for organizations to grasp.
Yeah, it is spot on. Clearly understood what it means. Yeah. Yeah, and it does show though that I'm not sure if you guys have seen that trend, but we're seeing a lot of organizations just flip to this value stream model, you know, and they're quoting the Spotify model and quickly reorganizing their whole business, and even on the basis of just costs as opposed to agility. But there's not that much, it doesn't seem that there's that much focus on, or it's an afterthought, it's done after they've done the restructure, about then supporting people managing that new way.
Yeah,
So,
I think for me, the second one there, the first three words sum it up perfectly, not clearly understood.
yeah.
I think there's an awful lot of depth as we move up the sophistication ladder that's not really grasped. People look for simple solutions, leaderships look for simple solutions often.
Yes. Exactly. And again, you know, so there's a massive opportunity with using DevOps and value stream management. There really is. And, you know, I think it's 30, 40%, etc. Someone's just asked the question, what do I mean? So the value stream model is effectively just aligning an organization, let's just say, around a customer journey. So rather than you're sat in HR, you're sat in pricing, you're sat in underwriting, you're sat in product development, this is aligning the organization around, okay, well, we've got one team or one community of people just focusing on helping onboard a customer, or one community of people helping deliver a better customer experience in, I don't know, mortgages or something like that. So it's about an outcome for the customer or outcome from an internal customer type of thing. That's how these organizations are being aligned. And as I said, that we're seeing a lot of organizations move towards that model. And obviously they've seen the Spotify video, etc. It may be lean, but it is also, I think they've been using it as an agile approach, and it's business process re-engineering, as you say. But it's obviously, the benefits are massive, and we've seen it when organizations can implement it properly. It delivers 30, 40% improvement in productivity and speed and cost efficiency, etc. But what concerns us is that if the Agile culture survey states that things are low, it potentially means that you're not going to get the full benefits. The results of what you're expecting are not going to come through. Yeah.
Vikram, there's a comment here, Vikram and John, there's a comment here on organizations are holding on to their classical structures, and structure makes culture type thing. You know, what's your perspectives on that?
Yeah, well, it's clearly happening, isn't it? Because it's very uncomfortable. We've seen people, we've just been working with a large insurance company where they're flipped to that value stream approach. And it is very uncomfortable because some people feel they've lost all their authority and power and control. And, you know, suddenly you've gone from running a team of, you know, I've proudly been running a team of 200 people through to, well, I'm just looking after a community and you know, I'm not accountable anymore for some of the outcomes. It's the business now doing that. So that's where I think it really is challenging for people.
Yeah, I think also that the holding on to traditional structures, people tend, as a result of that, also as part of that, to hold on to traditional metrics. That one of the comments that Andrew has made in the chat is about, if people are doing this for just cost reduction purposes, then basically maybe we're not really getting the full value out of this, and that's absolutely the case. None of this, of course, agility is not about cost reduction. It's about achieving a different kind of outcome completely. However, I think, like the structures, traditional metrics are also a comfort factor, and it's really difficult to let go of some of those.
Exactly. And what I love, and just going into that kind of structure debate, is that, you know, over the COVID crisis, we've seen, as we've talked about in the last couple of sessions that we've run, you know, that we've seen businesses genuinely deliver a step change in performance. You know, it's faster, more efficient, more productive, because they're prioritized and they're doing all the enforced agility things that John's mentioned in the past. But no one's ever done a restructure through the COVID crisis to achieve those results. But it's one of these addictions, I think, with a lot of organizations, just to do that because it's tangible, and maybe there's a cost element related to it as well. But the headline is, though, that as us as change managers, and I know there's lots of kind of consultants here and coaches and scrum masters is that, we just need to be conscious of, as you move into that more sophisticated ways of integrating businesses, that we need to definitely put the volume up on the support that leaders get through that process. And it's as someone said, it's not easy. Yeah. Okay, so that was kind of some of the big highlights from our survey. There'll be a lot more to come out of this. We're sure of that. As I said, we finished at 1:30, and we just kind of couldn't see anymore. But and John was telling us off for using too much data in the session. So we've just provided the really high level stuff, and we'd love to hear get any further feedback on the chat, or please just drop us a note with any other questions and perspectives. Paul, you've just got a view on the culture survey.
Yeah, so the culture survey remains open until next Monday. So if you haven't had the opportunity to fill it in, please do take the opportunity and kind of help shape some of the insights. So I've just shared the link in the chat functionality again. It takes just under 10 minutes to fill it in. So hopefully you'll find the time on this sunny day to do that.
Yeah, it's a bit weird. I mean, we have had some complaints about it. It is weird, but we just go with it.
Well, I think, yeah, we need to be agile enough to be able to cope with weird surveys. I think really, as individuals and things. And I wanted to just raise one point, if I could. It was going right back to the beginning, Vikram, where you talked about the scores correlating with performance.
Yes.
Which I think is it's really, really important. And of course, there will be people who are much better statisticians and much deeper academically orientated than me, who will say, does that also mean that there's a causality between the scores and the performance? I'm interested in the fact that, of course, this is the scores in relation to culture. Not the scores in relation to competency or effectiveness or efficiency or any of that sort of stuff. This is about the culture within the organization. And I think, I hope that most people would agree that culture is a function of leadership in an organization. So we come back to your point about actually we should be supporting leaders if we want to see culture actually move. Do you think that's a principle that would be accepted in the rest of an organization, that actually our focus ought to be supporting the leadership in order to make this an effectively agile organization?
Well, I think it's, based on our experience, I would say it's the key unlocker to agility. Obviously, you can get teams working at team level and they do some amazing things, but especially where we need to start looking, or the organizations are starting to broaden out and start applying agile more at an enterprise level, it's fundamental. I think that the leaders need to be more involved, more engaged, more educated, and obviously as a consequence supported through that process, because we always say that they've been very successful to get to that point, but many of them have been successful based on historic ways of managing change, which is fundamentally different to where things are right now.
So who should be making that decision, or who should be driving that? Let's upscale and let's upskill the leadership. Is it the board? Is it the shareholders? Who do you think?
Well, I mean, the simple answer would be, I think, themselves. And it's really hard. You can't enforce it. And we've played around with various different ways of trying to support our clients. Some with success, sometimes not so. But I think the most successful ones we've done is where the leaders actually get it, and our levers to do that has always been, rather than us bore you with PowerPoints, probably what we've just done with you guys today. Let's go and take you to another organisation, and you go and speak to one of your peers, and they'll walk you through their journey of their disbelief, their defensiveness, and then them getting it. So I think they've got to go and see it and then believe it, that actually that it can be done in similar organizations or of similar size or with heavy regulations and all that stuff. I think that's the most sustainable way. And I know it's an obvious answer, but it's got to come from within. We've, by the way, in our experience, we're working with some FTSE 100 businesses. We've seen the chairman or the chairperson basically trying to encourage the CEO to apply agility. Didn't work. We've seen the bottom up, where the teams are asking the leaders to move in that way. Again, it's quite challenging. It has to be, it just takes that light bulb moment where they go, okay, right, I get it now. And that comes in different ways, either desperation then there's that critical inflection point where they've got to suddenly compete and life suddenly changed, or they've gone up, and in some cases, and we've seen it really successfully, where they generally just go and speak to some peers, have a look at other organisations, and open their mind about there's other alternatives out there.
Right. So what appears to come out of this is, first of all, the correlation between the culture scores and performance is not accidental, and we see too much of that in the survey. And I would encourage everybody, actually, if you haven't done the survey, to please do it before it closes at the end of the month. The second thing is, if leaders, and I agree entirely, leaderships need to be responsible themselves for becoming more agile and therefore empowering agile cultures within their organizations. There's a huge role there to play for peer groups and for networks of leaders, if you like. So that's maybe one of the conversations that we can have in future about how do we influence those peer groups and those networks of leaders to help one another to become more agile.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, well, we are approaching incredibly on time. We are approaching the end, and I think I say incredibly because there was an enormous amount of information imparted there, I think, as well as some opportunity for discussion. Never enough opportunity for discussion. Loads and loads of questions in the chat and otherwise that we will be answering. This is me because I don't have to answer it. I'm passing this on to the others. We will be answering these questions in future. I would like, because this is the last one of this current season and we'll be coming back again in the autumn, I would like to thank, first of all, to thank Emily for having orchestrated and been the architect for all of these sessions. Thank you very much indeed. Clearly, of course, I'd like to thank JCURV for being the content for these sessions, and this has been really, really superb stuff and very enlightening and unique insights, I think, that we've seen. And lastly, and by no means least, I would like to thank you, the audience, as we say in the trade, because actually the point of all of this is for us to engage with you and to try and impart some insights and to get back from you the message of whether or not these are insights and to continue that conversation. So please do keep an eye out for the future messages about the next season of Coffee Breaks. And with that, I will say thank you very, very much indeed to everybody. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week, a wonderful weekend and a wonderful summertime. And we'll see you all again in September. Thank you very much indeed. Bye all.
Right.